My dear students, so far we studied the poem Grandma Climbs a Tree. Now let's start our journey of studying the next most important poem, that is Judge Poem 2. Let's first study the new words of this poem, and you should observe the pronunciation, the meaning of the words, and at the same time how to use these words in your own sentences. Practice them. Judge Poem 2, glossary, into bracket new words. Ancient Mariner, a reference to the poem The Rime of Ancient Mariner by Samuel T. Coleridge, in which a seaman shoots an albatross, a bird of good omen, and suffers supernatural punishment. ಕೋಲರಿಜ್ಜನ ಒಂದು ಪ್ರಸಿದ್ಧ ಕವಿತೆ, ಅದರರ್ಥ ಪ್ರಾಚೀನ ನಾವಿಕ. This is a very beautiful poem written by Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and in this poem this ancient mariner who kills a bird called albatross, and that results in a series of painful events. You have to study that poem. Because that poem is really wonderful one. You better study that. Varies of living, no longer interested in or enthusiastic about anything in life. ಜೀವನದಲ್ಲಿ ಆಸಕ್ತಿ ಕಳೆದುಕೊಂಡವ. Recently, Mr. Ramesh became a sannyasi because of varies of life. Fray, threads in a piece of cloth starting to come out apart. Haridu Chindiyagu. The jazz player has worn a shirt with frayed collar. Sag, to hang. Ilibidu. The jazz player's sagging stomach was held by the coat that he has worn. Solitude, the state of being alone. Ekanta. Some people choose solitude to refresh themselves. Ears perk, brighten up, Jagurukanagu. When the jazz player was playing his alto saxophone, the people listened to it with ears perked. Gospel, a type of religious music in which religious songs are sung very loudly. Suarte. Usually people go to church to listen to gospel. Screaming notes, loud musical sounds. Kiralu saddu. When the jazz player involved himself in the playing of jazz, he play beautifully with screaming notes. Extra words. Wrinkled, fold in the smoothness of a surface. Sukkugattida. The face of jazz player had wrinkles. Run down, worn, savedu hoda. The jazz player was wearing run down shoes. Saxophone, one of the metal wind instruments, ಒಂದು ಬಗೆಯ ಹಿತ್ತಾಳೆಯ ವಾದ್ಯ. The jazz player was a skilled person in playing alto saxophone. Preach, ಬೋಧಿಸು, deliver a sermon. The jazz player is preaching the black gospel of the jazz music to the whole world. Chords, combination of 3 or more notes of music. Swaramelaಗಳು. The jazz player began playing his alto saxophone with screaming notes and chords. So far we studied the new words of this poem. Now let's study the background and about the poet of this poem. This poem is written by Carl Wendell Hines Jr. and the poet is a math teacher, and at the same time he loved music a lot. The poet belongs to the family of educationists. His mother was a teacher and his father was a maths teacher as well as a great musician. The case is same with the poet also. He is also a maths teacher by profession, but he loved music, especially jazz music, and he was also expert in piano. He was living in Carolina in USA. In this poem, he gives a picture of a black old jazz player. Jazz player was a very humble man. He is a pathetic figure, but he was a commanding musician. He was able to hold the attention of his listeners, just like the ancient mariner. And in this poem, he depicts the picture of this black music player and his skills of playing alto saxophone. And this is a jazz poem too. There is another poem, jazz poem 1, that is available in the internet. If you want to read that poem, you go to internet and read that. The tone of that poem is also as like as this one. Let's study the poem now. Now I will read this poem and you listen to this poem by closing your book once and again listen the same poem opening your book while observing the pronunciation, and just try to get a small picture of this poem in the mind as I read. It will be very beautiful experience. Now let me read this. You have to observe the pronunciation of the new words of this poem also. There he stands, see, like a black ancient mariner. His wrinkled old face, so full of the worries of living, is turned downward. With closed eyes, his frayed collar, faded blue old shirt turns dark with sweat, and the old necktie undone drops loosely about the worn old jacket, just barely holding his sagging stomach in. His run down shoes have paper in them, and his rough unshaven face shows pain in every wrinkle, but there he stands in self-brought solitude, head still down, eyes still closed, ears perked, and trained upon the bass line, for across his chest lies an old alto saxophone, supported from his neck by a wire coat hanger. Gently he lifts it now to parted lips, see, to tell all the world that he is a black man, that he was sent here to preach the black gospel of judge. Now, preaching it with words of screaming notes and chords, he is no longer a man. No, not even a black man, but a bird, one that gathers his wings and flies higher until he flies away or come back to find himself a black man again, a black man again. Now let's see the line by line explanation of this poem. Now let's see the explanation of this poem. There he stands, see, like a black ancient mariner. The poet begins the poem showing us this black jazz player who was standing there. And how was this jazz player standing, you know? He was standing like a black ancient mariner. Ancient Mariner is a Coleridge's very beautiful poem, and in that poem, Ancient Mariner, he out into the sea with some sailors, and at that time his ship was taken by the wind towards South Pole. It was terrific for them. At that time, an albatross comes to their ship, and as soon as the albatross comes, and their journey was little smoother. But unfortunately, Ancient Mariner shoots that bird and kills that bird. And at the beginning, the results of the killing of the bird were not harming them, but soon they began to face terrible consequences of that. That is why all the sailors in that ship tie that albatross around the neck of Ancient Mariner. And it was a poem with supernatural elements, and it's a beautiful poem, and read it. It is available in the internet. Very beautiful poem. And here the poet compares this judge player to that Ancient Mariner. His wrinkled old face so full of the worries of living. This jazz player's face is full of wrinkles because he is old, and at the same time he is facing many problems in his life. Those problems have shattered him. Is turned downward with closed eyes. His face is turned downwards. Why it is turned downwards? Because of the full of the worries of the life, and he has also closed his eyes. His frayed collar, the collar of his shirt is frayed, means threads are appearing from that collar. It has torn. Faded blue old shirt. The color of the shirt of the jazz player is blue, but it is faded. Turns dark with the sweat, and the old necktie undone drops. Though the color of the shirt is blue, it is faded, and at the same time the shirt has turned dark because of the sweat of his body. And he has worn a necktie that was not properly worn, and it loosely drops undone. About the worn old jacket, just barely holding his sagging stomach. He is wearing an old jacket also, and that jacket, what's the work of that jacket, you know? It's just holding his sagging stomach in. Hey, his run down shoes have paper in them. His shoes have also worn out. and there are holes in his shoes, and he has put some papers in those holes so that the torn area of the shoes will be covered. Now let me ask you a few questions on these three stanzas. Whom does the poet compare this jazz player in the first stanza? How is his face described? And what about the shirt of the jazz player, and what about the collar of his shirt? Describe in 2-3 lines about his shirt. What work is being performed by his old jacket? Say a few words about his shoes. Paper in them, and his rough, unshaven face shows pain. His face is rough and at the same time unshaven. It's showing pain in each wrinkle. His face is full of wrinkles, and in those each wrinkles one can find the pains of the life. But there he stands in self-brought solitude. Though he has many worries and pains and troubles in his life, still he is standing there with self-brought solitude. Means he is alone. He is alone by his own choice. Head still down. His head is still down. Eyes still closed, and his eyes are still closed. Ears perked and trained upon the bass line, for across his chest lies but his eyes are perked, means they are ready to listen something. What he wanted to listen, some notes, some pitches, some intervals, some melody, some chords in the music that he is playing. His ears are trained to recognize those things and play smoothly. He is a trained musician. The jazz player's ears are trained on the bass lines. Usually a training called ear training is given to musicians so that they will be able to find different kinds of pitches, intervals, melodies, chords, rhythms, and other basic elements of music. So his ears are perked because they are trained to find the bass line in the music that he is playing. For across his chest lies an old alto saxophone. He is a player of alto saxophone. It's lying across his chest, supported from his neck by a wire coat hanger. He has tied that alto saxophone around his neck with the help of a wire, that is coat hanger. Gently he lifts it now to parted lips. See, whatever alto saxophone he has around his neck, now he takes it and he takes it up and he wants to play it. He brings that alto saxophone to his parted lips so that he can play that. See? Now let me ask a few questions to you. Here, how is the face of jazz player described? What one can find in each wrinkle of his face? And how he is standing there? Are his eyes closed or open? What his ears are trained upon? What lies across his chest? With what support the alto saxophone is hung around his neck? See, to tell all the world that he is a black man. Now he lifts that alto saxophone to his parted lips so that he can play that. While playing, he says that he is a black man, that he was sent here to preach the black gospel of judge. And the poet says that the black man is sent on this earth to teach, to preach the black gospel of the judge music. Now preaching it with the words of screaming notes and chords. How the jazz player is preaching the black gospel of jazz music, with the chords and with the screaming notes. Whatever alto saxophone he is playing now, the sound of that alto saxophone will be like screaming notes, with which he is preaching the black gospel of the judge to the whole world. He is a very, very skilled musician, trained musician. He is no longer a man, no, not even a black man, but a bird. Now, when this jazz player is playing the jazz music, what he becomes, he is no longer a man at all, and not even a black man at all. Now he becomes a bird, one that gathers his wings and flies higher. The bird which gathers its feathers and it starts flying into the sky higher, and that kind of enjoyment he has in his music. While playing music, he forgets all the worries of his life and he becomes a bird until he flies away. How the bird flies away in the sky now, in the same manner this black man while playing becomes a bird and he has the feeling of flying away in the sky, or come back to find himself a black man again. But truth is truth and reality is reality. Whatever enjoyment he has, that remains only when he is playing the jazz music. When he comes back to the earth, means when he stops playing, he finds himself again a black old man with all the worries of life. Now let me ask a few questions on this poem. While playing, what does he want to tell to the whole world? With his jazz music, what does the jazz player preach to the world, and how he teaches to the world about the black gospel of music? When he is playing, he is not at all a black man. What else he is? He becomes a bird and flies away. When he comes back, when he stops playing, what is he again? So far we studied the explanation of the poem Jazz Poem 2. Now let's see the gist of this poem. Now let's see this poem in a nutshell. The poet Carl Wendell Heinz Jr., he gives a small picture of this jazz player. The jazz player is standing like an old ancient mariner. Ancient mariner is the hero of the poem Ancient Mariner, which was written by S.T. Coleridge. Ancient Mariner had a kind of magical power to hold the attention of the listeners. In the same manner, this jazz player might be standing in order to hold the attention of the listeners. He was an eloquent jazz player. But the life of the jazz player is so pathetic, and he is a poor person. His face is old and wrinkled, and he is suffering from the worries of life. He has closed his eyes and he has hung his head down. He is wearing a blue faded shirt, and the color of that shirt has turned dark because of the sweat. And at the same time, the collar of his shirt is frayed, means it is also torn to pieces, and threads are coming out of that collar. And he is wearing a necktie, but he has not tied it well. It's hanging loosely. And he is also wearing a jacket. What about that jacket? That's also old, and that jacket is doing the work of holding his sagging stomach up tight. And he is wearing a pair of shoes. Those shoes have also torn and they have holes in them, and in order to cover those holes, this jazz player has put some papers in them. And his face is wrinkled and his face is unshaven, and in every wrinkle of his face one can find the pains of the life, and he has brought upon himself a kind of loneliness, solitude, and he is still standing there with head down and with eyes closed. But his ears are very alert. His ears are perked. Why they are perked or alert, he wants to play music beautifully, and that's what is his life. And in order to find various melodies and bass line and pitches, in order to find all these things, his ears are trained. That is why his ears are alert before he begins playing that. What he plays? He plays, there is an alto saxophone across his chest, which is hung across his chest, supported by a wire coat hanger, and he wants to play that alto saxophone. Now the jazz player lifts that alto saxophone gently and he begins playing that alto saxophone. With that music, what he wants to tell to the whole world, he is a black man. His worries and whatever problems he has in his life, and that is the way he has chosen to express those all things, and he wants to preach the whole world the black gospel of the jazz music. The jazz player might have undergone some class wars, some discriminations that might be expressed through his jazz music, and he wants to teach to the whole world the black gospel of jazz with screaming notes and chords. Some changes take place virtually when he begins playing the jazz music. What changes? He forgets all his pains and worries and everything. As soon as he begins playing, he becomes a bird, and how the bird goes into the sky flapping its wings, in the same way the jazz player also goes out into the sky, and he has forgotten everything. He has forgotten that he is a man, and he has also forgotten that he is a black man. But reality is reality, truth is truth. It remains that happiness of flying away in the sky remains as long as he is playing this jazz music. But when he stops playing music, again he is a black man with all the poverty and pain, sorrows of his life. And this is what a small gist of this poem. Now let's study the 2 marks questions of this poem. 2 marks questions, short answer. 1. Give a short description of the jazz player. In the first 2-3 stanzas, we will study about the appearance of the jazz player. That we should explain in 2-3 sentences. The jazz player's face is old and wrinkled. Jazz player is a old man. His face is full of wrinkles. His shirt collar is torn into pieces, and the collar of his shirt is frayed, and the threads are coming out from that. His blue color shirt is faded and turned dark with sweat. He has worn a blue color shirt, but that blue color shirt has turned dark because of the sweat, and it is also faded. He wears an old jacket and undone necktie and torn shoes. His jacket that he is wearing is also old, and the tie he is wearing, that is undone, and he is wearing shoes. In that shoes, papers are appearing out of that because they were torn. In order to patch the holes, he has put some papers into those shoes. Second one, as the jazz player starts playing, what kind of changes occur? Jazz player simply starts playing his jazz music, and as soon as he starts playing, what kind of changes he enjoys? As the jazz player starts playing, he forgets all the pains of his life. His head is hung and his eyes are closed because of the worries and pains of the life. But when he starts playing, he forgets everything and he becomes a bird. He feels like a bird flying high up in the sky. While playing music, he goes up in the sky and he feels such a great happiness. That's the meaning of the stanza. What qualities of the jazz player do you appreciate? This question has come in the question paper, board exam question paper in June 2020. That has come for 2 marks. What are the qualities that we find in the jazz player? They are appreciable. The jazz player was a simple man. He was a pathetic figure but commanding artist. We can see a kind of simplicity in the jazz player. He wears a very old attire on his body. He is a pathetic figure. His face is so sad and melancholic, but he is a commanding artist. He can hold the attention of the people. He had a kind of soft power to make people listen to him. When he starts playing, all the people starts to listen to him, and that power can be called as a soft power of holding attention of the other people. Though he was silent in speech, he was eloquent in music. His words are so limited. He might have closed his eyes and he might have kept quiet, but when he is playing, he is so eloquent, he is so fluent in his music. He is a talented and gifted jazz player. What was the special gift possessed by the jazz player? How did it change his feelings? This question has appeared in September 2020 for 2 marks in the board exam. The meaning of this question is, the jazz player has some special gift, and what is that special gift, and how that gift changes his feelings. Jazz player had got the natural gift of playing saxophone. He was a jazz player and he plays alto saxophone, and that is the gift he had. He was a commanding artist and eloquent player of jazz, and he is very commanding in his jazz playing and eloquent. He plays the jazz music very fluently, and he has mastery in that jazz music. He played his saxophone whenever he is feeling sad. He is full of worries and pains. He is suffering in his life, and whenever he feels so sad, and this jazz music gives him a kind of happiness. He would forget the worries of material life and feels happy while playing the jazz. whatever pains he has in his life, and all those pains he forgets, and he becomes like a bird, and he feels very happy when he is playing the jazz music. So far we studied the 2 marks questions of this poem. Now let's have a look at the 3 marks questions of this poem. That is, they are RC type of questions. RC type of questions. His frayed collar, faded blue old shirt turns dark. The collar which is torn and the shirt he is wearing, that is old and blue, but it has turned dark. A. Who does the word his refer to? In this line, the word his is there. What is the, who does that his refer to? And that word his refer to the judge player, the hero of that poem. What condition of the jazz player does the above line suggest? In this line, he is wearing a frayed collar, blue color shirt, and that has turned dark because of the sweat. And this appearance, what condition of the jazz player does it suggest? It suggests his poverty. In which poem do you see this? See the above line. Whichever line we see here, in which poem we can find that? We can find that line in the poem Judge, poem 2. Question number 2. Gently he lifts it now to the parted lips. He lifts it to his parted lips so that he can play. Who does he refer to? In this line, the word he is there, na? Who is that he, or who does that he refer to? The answer is judge player. B. What does he lift to parted lips? In that line we see that he lifts it to his parted lips gently. What's that thing he lifts it to parted lips? That's a saxophone, alto saxophone. In which poem do you find this line? Whatever line we see here, in which poem we can find that? We can find that line in Judge, poem 2. 3. He was sent here to preach the black gospel of music. That person who has sent on this earth to teach something. What does he teach? You know, he teaches the black gospel of the judge music. Who does he refer to? In this line, the word he is there. Who does this word he belong to, or who does this word he refer to? The word he refers to jazz player. How does he preach it? How the jazz player is preaching this black gospel of music? With the help of jazz music. Whatever jazz music he plays with the alto saxophone, through that music he is preaching this to the world. In which poem do you see this line? Answer is Judge, poem 2. The whatever line is there, na, that line in which poem we can see that. So that poem is Judge, poem 2. Every line of this poem is an RC question. So we should not forget the other lines also. These are just examples how the questions will be, and how 3 questions on each line are asked. That thing I discussed here, but you have to study the poem as a whole so that you will be able to answer whichever question may come. So far we studied the 3 marks RC type of questions. Now let's study the summary of this poem. Judge, poem 2, summary. The poem Judge, poem 2 is the continued part of the same poem, part 1. The poet Carl Wendell Hines Jr. has written the first poem, Judge, poem 1, and this poem is the continued part of that Judge, poem 1. This poem is written by Carl Wendell Hines Jr. The poet explains the poor, pathetic condition of an old jazz player. And this poem is written by Carl Wendell Hines Jr. And here in this poem, you can see the caricature, the picture of an old jazz player. Here in this poem, one can find out old jazz player. He is poor, he is a pathetic figure. But at the same time, he was a commanding and eloquent jazz player. Though the jazz player is poor and old and full of worries of life, he is a very commanding artist. He is able to hold the attention of the listeners. The jazz player is standing like a black ancient mariner. Here the jazz player is compared to old ancient mariner, the hero of S.T. Coleridge's Ancient Mariner poem. His face is old, wrinkled and turned downward with the full of worries of life. The face of the jazz player is old one, his whole body is old one, and that face is wrinkled, and also he has hung his head down. Why? Because he is full of worries of life. His eyes are also closed. His eyes are closed. He has worn a shirt that is blue in color. Jazz player's eyes are closed and jazz player is wearing a blue shirt. But it is faded and turned dark because of sweat. That shirt has not been washed. That shirt has the color of that shirt has turned to dark because of the sweat and dirt. The jacket is old. Whatever jacket he is wearing, that's also old. It is barely holding his sagging stomach. What's that jacket's work? It's holding his sagging stomach in. His necktie is undone and hanging loosely over his chest. Jazz player is also wearing a necktie, but that necktie is not tied properly and it's hanging on over the alto saxophone. His shoes have paper in them as they are worn out. He is also wearing an old pair of shoes. Those shoes are worn out, and there are holes in those shoes, and he has put paper in those holes so that they should not appear to the others. His rough, unshaven, wrinkled face is full of pain. As he is a poor man, he is old man. He has his own worries, and that worries can be seen in every wrinkle, and that head is hung down because of the worries and pains of the life. He is standing with his head down and eyes closed. How he is standing, his head is down and eyes are closed. A saxophone hangs across his chest, supported by a wire coat hanger. Across his chest there is an alto saxophone, and that alto saxophone is supported by the coat wire hanger that he has hung across his chest. He wanted to tell that he was a black man. God has sent him to preach the black gospel of jazz. With the help of that alto saxophone, with the help of that jazz music, what he wants to preach to the whole world, he is a black man, and he has been sent by the God to teach and preach the black gospel of jazz music. When he starts playing his alto saxophone with loud screaming notes, he is transformed into a bird. Whatever pains he is carrying in his mind, those all pains run away as soon as he begins to play that alto saxophone, and he is like a bird when he plays that. This is not the end of this summary. Still some more lines are there. Let's see them in page 2. This is page 1. The jazz player, while playing that alto saxophone, he is not a man, he is not even a black man, but he is a bird that flies higher and higher until it flies away. The bird, it flies away into the sky, and it flies higher, higher, higher and goes away into the sky. But the haunting truth remains with him forever. But truth is truth, reality is reality. That truth is haunting truth, very sad truth for our black old jazz player. Because when he stops playing, he finds himself a poor black man again. As long as he is playing jazz music, he is a bird, he is a happy man. But when he stops, he is a black man again. When he stops playing that music, when he comes back from that hangover of happiness, that he finds himself a poor black man again. Previous exam questions, these questions we have already discussed in 2 marks questions section, and in previous exams, June 2020 and September 2020 exams, in each of these exams, 1 2 marks question is asked, and those I have already discussed. So far we studied Judge poem 2. Now let's begin the study of the next poem, that is